everyone.
Hello.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Midday Mystery event with Sarah Crouch for her novel Middletide, which is the Barnes and Noble Mystery Thriller monthly pick for March. I am so thrilled to be here to talk about it with her. My name is Patti Callahan Henry, and I am an author. My last two books, The Secret Book of Flora Lee and The Story She Left Behind, which is out in 9 days on March 18th. But we are here to talk to Sarah, and I'm thrilled. Sarah and I shared an editor for a while, so I was lucky enough to read Middletide before it came out years ago, before the hardcover was released. And I was rightly obsessed with this novel. So Sarah Crouch is well known all over the world for her accolades in the world of athletics, specifically running as a professional marathon runner. And Middletide, I can't believe this, but it is her debut novel. It reads like an experienced mystery writer. And it is set in the Pacific Northwest where she was raised. But now Sarah lives in a couple hours north of me in Alabama. So we're going to talk about that dichotomy, the Pacific Northwest in Alabama. And she lives there with her husband and young children. So welcome, Sarah. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Patti, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I just want to give a very, very big thank you to Patti because she is coming off the flu. She's going to do her best, but if she coughs a little bit, please forgive her.
Do forgive me. We're just not going to talk. We're just going to pretend it didn't happen. Oh, Sarah, I'm so ready to dive into this novel. I know I've told you so many times how much I love it and how much I loved it from when I read, and I reread it again and looked at everything so we could have our conversation. And again, I am just stunned by the complexity and the beauty of this novel. I gave it a blurb and I said, it is riveting, an immense, richly drawn, and wholly powerful experience. And I stand by that statement.
Thank you, Patti. You were my first blurber. When a book is published, especially for a debut author, one of the big things that an editor does to sort of give the book momentum is you reach out to iconic authors like Patti to have them read and blurb the book. So that was the first. You were sincerely one of my first readers, and the blurb meant so much to me. So I've never gotten to actually thank you publicly. So thank you for that.
Oh, Sarah, you are more than welcome. It was actually my honor. And I feel like we're sisters because Flora Lee was The Secret Book of Flora Lee, was the Barnes and Noble Book Club pick. Mm-hmm. And you're the mystery thriller pick. So we're Barnes and Noble sisters on top of it, on top of editor sisters. So let's take a dive into this novel. So I'm just going to give a quick summary, but I'm going to ask you to expand a little bit. So this novel is about the suspicious death of this beautiful young doctor. And all the clues in this small town point to a reclusive young man who has abandoned the community. He had gone off to chase big city dreams, but now he's returned for the first love he left behind. That is how we meet 33-year-old Elijah, a writer. I love that your main character is a writer. And when he returns to his family's ramshackle cabin, God, I love that cabin. I want to go visit it. And he rekindles his relationship with Nikita, an extraordinary girl from the nearby reservation. But now it appears that Elijah is the primary suspect in the murder of the young doctor. So, Sarah, if that is what the book is about, what would you add, if anything? But more importantly, what would you say the book is really about?
So it does follow the story of Elijah Leith. And, when we first meet him, he has a story a lot like a lot of us, which is a small town kid with these great big dreams. He wants to go and be the next great American novelist. So he chases that dream to San Francisco and spends his 20s writing this mystery novel called Middletide, which utterly flops. So by the time he returns home to the Northwest, he's out of money, he's out of motivation. And he really tries to find purpose again in restoring this cabin and restoring the land that it sits on. And he's really kind of starting to get his feet underneath him again when a woman in the town, the beautiful doctor that you mentioned, she's found dead on his property in a crime exactly like the one he wrote about in Middletide. So that's where the mystery sort of comes in. It's really trying to untangle the threads of who could be framing him in such a specific way for this crime. what is it really about? It's about you, Patty. Let's be honest.
Yeah, right.
So,
You didn't even know me, but it's about me. Yeah.
no, I think kind of on its face, it is about redemption. It's about second chances and moving on from sort of abject failure and what to do if you
Yeah.
can't move on. But more than anything else, it was certainly written to be a 90,000 word love letter to the kind of staggering beauty of the Pacific Northwest where I grew up.
And it is. I was going to read just the first line because um, from the minute you start, you are set in that beautiful setting. Gray foam slapped the bow of the Crestliner as it zipped north across the still waters of the Puget Sound. And it goes on from there, describing the evergreens and the dying pine with bleached branches like exposed bones. So it really is a love letter to the Pacific Northwest. But one of the things I love talking about when I talk to authors about stories, and even in my own, is what I call origin stories. Like, what can you pinpoint the moment that you first came up with the idea, the original spark for this debut novel, or the seed of the story? Can you pinpoint when that was?
Isn't it funny how as writers that should be the easiest question, but it's so
It
difficult.
never is.
Yeah, I think honestly, the seeds of ideas, they're sort of like butterflies, and a job of a writer is to have your net with you at all times because you might be walking down the sidewalk, one flutters
Love
by
that.
you to catch it. Yeah. So for me, truly, we had just moved to Alabama. I was, I think, 3 months postpartum with my second child, and I was just desperately homesick for Washington State. So the first thing I knew I wanted to set a book in Washington. And for like most debut authors, Middletide is not the first book that I wrote. It's my first book that was published. So I'd written 8 manuscripts in the 10 years leading to it.
8.
Yes, 8. Yeah. And
That's why it doesn't feel like a debut. That's why. Yeah, there you go.
that's part of it, I think.
Yeah.
It does take a while to find your voice, but honestly, it was the first book that I set in Washington, and I think that's on a really selfish level. For me, it was a chance every day to sort of open my laptop and step across the country back into the woods of my youth.
Yeah.
Selfishly, yes, it was the setting, and that's what came first.
All right. Usually, setting usually comes with my character, but I love that your setting was the original spark of the idea.
Do characters come first for you, Patty?
Yes. The quandary comes first, like the what if.
Yeah.
The what if. And then the setting must reflect that, which we're going to talk about in a minute here. You, as you just said, you live in Alabama now, and the Pacific Northwest is the quiet and fictionalized sound of Port Orchard.
Mhm.
So it became your setting. And so not only was that obviously your first spark, but it completely influences the story. So how did it influence the mood and the tone of Middletide for you?
It actually had a massive impact on the book in that making it a mystery novel, the setting is what prompted me to choose that genre. I think contrast is one of the more like potent arrows in any writer's quiver. It's a really, really useful tool. And I think, in choosing the setting, something that is a place that is just, I grew up thinking the whole world was that beautiful. I had no idea until I left that. I was like, oh man, like I legitimately grew up in one of the most beautiful places on the planet. But I knew it would be a perfect place to set the contrast of death, because what is a better way to highlight a shocking death than to just drop it headfirst into verdant life? So I think that was, it definitely it influenced the entire novel. Everything, it really revolves around the setting. And I've had so many people, I think the highest compliment I receive from people is when they say, wow, the setting really played a character in the novel, because that was certainly my intention.
And I feel like you also use that world to reflect Elijah's emotions, meaning that the outside world reflects his inside world, and his internal world is reflected in this lake and the sound and the woods surrounding this. I mean, even the ramshackle cabin, to me, I don't know if you did it on purpose, but it almost represented to me his internal state of affairs. He was just it was home. His body and his mind were his home, but they were a mess, just like the cabin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I really love to play with setting, and it was important to me that the piece of property in which Elijah exists, that it really reflected his character's growth.
Yes.
So when he first, when the book truly opens and he's 33 and he's lost and he's back on this piece of land, I wanted it to mirror what he was going through. It's rough, it's wild land, and it's this broken down cabin. And as he tends to it, the land produces food. It grows with him as his character grows, and as he sheds his ego and a bit of his this selfishness. He has this sort of belated coming of age on this property. And I think Elijah is a character that, because we get to know him largely through negative space. It's a lot about what he isn't saying, and he spends a lot of the book alone on this property. So yeah. I think it's an author's job to put a character into a situation that's going to sort of reveal who they are. So that was definitely my intention with the land that he lives on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the cottage too. So you share something in common with Elijah,
a lot,
and with Nikita, and that is your love of running.
Yes, ma'am.
So I understand a lot about your love of writing and the natural world and the way we use setting and character. The love of running is not in my wheelhouse. So how did your experience as a professional multi-award winning marathon runner influence the work and the characters?
It's funny. I get that question a lot of, what do running and writing have in common? And I think at a professional level, well, they're both jobs that look a lot more glamorous from the outside.
Yeah, it's true. They're also very lonely.
They are very lonely,
yes.
Very isolated. Yeah. And I think that they're both jobs that they often require years and years and years of really hard work with little to no reward before you succeed. So that sort of grit that it takes to emerge as one of the top marathoners in the country. That was 15 years of incredibly hard work that led up to that. So writing was very much the same way. And if there's one thing that I feel like suited me well, I don't think it was talent or even necessarily hard work. I think it was grit. It was just that willingness to keep going throughout the hardship. And in my writing, I failed for 8 manuscripts in a row before I succeeded. And I think it would have been easier to throw in the towel and say, okay, this just isn't working. Let's try something else. But I am
perseverance, Sarah.
Yeah,
perseverance.
Nothing is not determined. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you and why did you use some of that for your 2 characters?
Elijah is he's a very autobiographical character.
Okay.
I think, after 8 manuscripts that had failed, I finally realized, like, it was the definition of insanity, like hitting your head against the wall and it's just not working. So in the words of that wise old theologian Taylor Swift, I'm the problem, it's me. So I finally sat back and I did take that.
Don't make me laugh.
Sorry.
It makes me cough. Go ahead. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Yeah. But the oldest writing advice in the world is write what you know. And so when the book opens in Elijah, he's 33 and he's lost. When I wrote it, I was 33 and I was lost. And he's mourning this failed career. And for me, I had run all throughout my 20s and into my 30s. And then when I had children, a lot of women have postpartum depression or anxiety. I had postpartum insomnia where I would go stretches of 70, like 80 hours without sleep. And
Sarah.
It was honestly, it was horrific. And it's difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't gone through it, but there's no way to train through something like that. So I didn't feel like I was ready to give up my running, but it felt like my running had walked away from me. And so when I wrote Elijah, when I wrote his character, that's where he was. He was at rock bottom at the end of giving his 20s to this dream that fell out from beneath him. So I just poured that heartache into him. And I think it's one of the great ironies of my life that this book about his redemption brought me a publishing contract and my redemption in this brand new career. It's still insane to me whenever I think about it.
Well, that's what writing does. I mean, I'm telling you, it's
write your way out. Yeah.
Got the only way through is through, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I do know some people who've written a debut novel and it's the first thing that got published. It wasn't that way for me. It wasn't that way for you. And
how many did you have in the drawer, Patti, by the time you were published?
2.
That's not bad. That's not
bad, but it felt like, I mean, it was probably 6 years of work, 6 years. And like you, I had changed careers. I'd been a nurse and then done it. So, and I had young children when I started. So, but then again, that was also 18 books ago. So, It's I always say it's perseverance, and I know running's the same way. So I'm just going to trust you on that. So I want to go back to the natural world a little bit because you have this beautiful author's note, and I hope you don't mind if I just read real quick. You say, well, Middle Tide is a work of fiction, inspiration for the Squaloma people and the Sacred Mountain Reservation was drawn from the author's personal experience with the indigenous people of Lumi and Navajo nations. The author wishes to emphasize that the Squalama culture is fictional and while inspired by indigenous cultures, does not represent a real indigenous nation. All aspects of reservation life were written from a place of deep respect and with the desire to explore the unique connection between the U.S. reservations and the citizen towns that they touch. Now, for me, this was one of the most powerful parts of the novel and part of the Pacific Northwest that I've always been interested in and curious about. And sometimes you see, fictionalized in movies about the Northwest. But tell me why you decided to do it and why it was so important for you to say what I just read.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't think it's possible to grow up in the Northwest without interacting with tribal people. It's a huge part of life there. And I've been fortunate enough to live in two places, Bellingham, Washington, and then Flagstaff, Arizona, that both abut.
Oh, wow.
So Lummi
Yeah.
Nation, Navajo Nation. And with the church we attended in Arizona was about, I think, maybe half Navajo. And we actually got the chance to meet the president of Navajo Nation and make fry bread with a woman on the reservation. And that's been a really big part of my life. And I think it would have been a mistake to write a Northwest book without at least incorporating that a little bit. In terms of fictionalizing it, the whole universe of the book is fictitious. So Point Orchards is, I get this question constantly, but people ask, oh, is it based on Port Orchards? It is not. Port Orchards, the actual town in Washington, is about 10 times the size of the fictional town. So I chose the name Point Orchards because Port Orchards and Point Roberts, right between them geographically, is where I wanted my town set.
Okay.
And I thought creatively that it would be a mistake to shape an existing reservation to fit my fictional world. And this is a decision that I've definitely received a lot of
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah, and it's been interesting because this is something that's actually fairly common. It happens not just in literature, but in the shows we watch, like Yellowstone.
Yeah, 1923.
Yeah. Or thinking of a better example is a show like Parks and Rec, where Indiana's a real state, but Pawnee is not a real town, and the Wamapoke tribe is not a real tribe because sort of the universe of the show is fictitious. So that was the sort of creative decision that went into it. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. All right. I can see some live questions coming in, and we also have some that were submitted beforehand. So I'm going to ask you one more question before we dive into the questions that other people are asking, because I'm really curious about this. To solve the mystery, you've written a dual timeline. We weave in and out. So I want to hear about that decision. And I also would love to hear, especially after writing other manuscripts, about the writing process for that. Are you a big because I know people are going to ask this question. Are you a big outliner? Did you fly by the seat of your pants? Why did you decide to do it the way you did it?
Okay, so for the dual timeline, the great thing about crime fiction is that there's a timeline sort of baked into the cake. There's a dead body at the beginning and a killer caught at the end. But I knew I wanted the story to be more than that. I wanted coming of age. I wanted a love story. So rather than tell this story that spanned 20 years, rather than tell it slowly and work your way through, I thought the best way to keep tension would be to have a sort of present day timeline with the investigation that weaves through. And actually, I surprised myself in the writing process, and that the investigation chapters were actually my favorite to write. We have
no way.
Yeah. So we have the investigation, obviously very small town. So we have a sheriff and a deputy. And I will be honest with you, I watched a lot of Andy Griffith growing up, and
that's so great.
I've always really enjoyed the dynamic between a competent sheriff and maybe a not so competent deputy.
Right.
So we have Sheriff Jim Godbout, who is 68 years old. He's on the brink of retirement, and as he puts it, in the first chapter of the book that no one in this small town has had the nerve to be murdered. And so he's kind of, working his way through this investigation, and he is just exhausted. And then you have his young, very eager deputy, Jeremy. So the dynamic between the two of them was just so much fun. And I actually think that those chapters, while they do keep tension and while they do provide that crime timeline, they also sort of serve as comfort food and a little bit of brevity between the kind of heavier chapters of Elijah's coming of age. Now, what was the second question you asked? I completely forgot.
About your writing process. Are you an outliner, seat of your pants?
Oh, right.
How did you?
So, yeah. So, and Patty, you know this, but writers they're called pantsers or plotters. The write by the seat of your pants people, and then the people who plot. So for 8 manuscripts, I was a pantser. I had no idea what was happening. It's also called discovery writing when you just let the story flow. Middletide was the first book that I plotted, and I will never write another book without plotting again.
Okay.
Yeah. So to me, do you plot, Patty?
Yes and no. I would say I have a scaffolding. I am not a big plotter. I do not do a this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. But I do have a pretty big scaffolding, and I do spend a lot of time understanding what my character wants, why they want it, why they can't get it, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But no, I am not a big outliner.
Do you have, so in your sort of character profiles, like, do you have an idea of at least what's going to happen, or maybe how the book's going to end or anything like that?
Vaguely, yeah. I know where I'm going.
Yes, yeah.
Sometimes I'm wrong, and sometimes I'm right.
Yes. That's
How about you?
Well, I think you do. It is really, really helpful to have. In my mind, it's sort of like that skeleton that hangs in the corner of a science room. It's,
Yeah.
Yeah. So then when you go to write a chapter, it's almost like you're crafting a muscle, but you know where it goes, you know what its function is and what it's supposed to do. But it should be subject to change. There should be room for organic growth. So cause there's a little bit of that magic that happens while you're writing, where your characters, they start to live and breathe, and they do things that you don't expect. Like there's a character in Middletide where we decided beforehand, no spoilers, but there's a character who just went and died on me, and I did not expect it. So that does
no, thank you. Could you please come back?
I was devastated. Yeah.
I did not mean for that to happen. Yeah. That's funny. All right. I want to jump to some of the questions that people have sent in, and also some of the live questions, because I could ask you questions all day. I really love this question. Someone named Molly Berry wrote in and said, do you ever think you will publish those other manuscripts that you mentioned? And do you think now would be easier to get them published after success with Middletide? Or have you rather written something new?
Oh, man. Absolutely not. I will never have them published. I would be embarrassed if they saw the light of day. The thing is, so, man, this was the first mystery novel I wrote. I wrote everything from an angsty romance set on the coast of Maine to Depression era Georgia, peach plantation, interesting novel set there, everything, even to like a sci-fi based on a dream I had. Like I was truly just shooting out feelers and trying to find my voice. And not until I wrote Middletide did I feel like, oh, I'm home. Like this is my genre. This is where I want to be. Yeah, so absolutely not. Would it be easier to have them published? Actually, probably not. And you know this, Patty, once you start to put out books, it would be maybe easy to put it out under a pen name. It'd be easier to have those relationships, but you sort of develop, I hate to use this word, but your brand, you sort of develop, what it is that you're known for. And I think it would be a massive departure to read those novels.
And I also think sometimes that the things we've written are, nothing is wasted. People ask me that too, right? Like, do you feel like the things you've had to cut or your manuscripts in the drawer, I feel like nothing is ever wasted. Those books led you to where you are now.
They're bricks in the wall. They're bricks in the wall of your career. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would sing the song, but I won't. So I'm gonna jump over here to some of the questions that were sent in ahead of time, because people were so thoughtful about sending some things in ahead of time. So Bonnie Davis would like to know, who is your favorite character in this book and why?
Oh, it's funny because he's not on the page very much, but I'm really partial to Samuel, his father. I think in many ways, he actually is sort of in the bedrock of the novel. He is kind of a cornerstone for Elijah and Nikita's relationship. And basically, in a nutshell, him being able to root for this guy who broke his daughter's heart. I think that's something that as a parent, I aspire to and would never be. But I really admire his character. I think he's someone that truly is just solid all the way through. And that's rare to find in real life. When you find those people, you hold on to him. And he's definitely one of those people.
Yeah, I love that character too. Somebody named Keith Zimmer actually has two questions. Are there any plans for a book signing tour, and where can people get signed books by you?
It's so funny. The idea of a tour came up very briefly between myself and my editor, and I said absolutely not, just because my children are so little. They're 2 and 4,
Yeah.
and they really, really need me. And there is nothing on earth that I would like that sounds worse to me than traveling around the country. And Patti, you are incredible. You travel constantly. You are always on the move, and you're doing these events. And I do love events when I do them, but perhaps when my kids are school age.
I'm in a different phase of life than
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
But
Yes,
yeah.
yeah. I will get there at some point. I will probably want to tour, and I do. It's an absolute delight. Yeah, I mean, you can attest to this, Patti, but it's the best part of the job is meeting readers. It really is.
100%. 100%. I hit the road Monday the 17th for March 17th for 32 stops.
Oh,
I could have never done that.
Where are you headed? Are you going all the way East Coast, West Coast? How are you going to do it?
Yep. All over the place. But I could have never done that when my kids were little like yours. So, okay, this is a great question. And it's something I don't think either one of us can fully answer. So I'm going to be curious to hear. Pras Patel would like to know, how do you decide and if an idea is good enough to be a novel?
How do you decide, Patti?
If I feel like I'm curious enough that I am willing to spend the next couple years of my life researching it, writing it, and talking about it.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, I mean, I think that sums it up. Honestly, nothing turns me away faster as a reader than opening a book and feeling like an author was not passionate about what they were doing. I think especially you can maybe get away with that in nonfiction a little more, but in fiction, a reader can smell it from a mile away. So if I am not so passionate that I have to write this book, then I'm not going to write it. Yeah. And have you ever just full stop like 20,000 words and just been like, no, I'm not in it. Have you ever like trashed a novel?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I was going to say too. And sometimes we're wrong.
Yes.
I mean, the novel I have coming out in a couple weeks, I thought I was going to write a novel about Beatrix Potter. That's what we shared a publishing line. That's what Atria wanted for me. That's what I started writing. But I started doing my research on her and discovered someone else and said, oh my gosh, right? So sometimes these things we think we're going to write about lead us to something else. So was this book always going to be what it's about now? Like, how much did this book change along the way?
So when I first started writing it, I think I had a basic plot outline down, but then bear with me here, but my parents took this road trip and they went down from Washington down the coast of California to this section of the state called the Lost Coast. It's basically every time the tide comes in, it's eating away at the land there. And so this entire town is kind of gradually crumbling into the ocean. So as my parents were telling me about this place and they were sending me pictures, I thought, oh, because at certain points when the tide is up there, when high tide is in, there's parts of the land that are not accessible. Like they're kind of stuck.
Wow.
So I thought in my head, like, what if a crime happened out there while the tide was in? So it almost created this locked room mystery of like, it's limited to the people in this tiny town who all knew one another because it happened when the tide was up. And that thought spurred this idea for a mystery and how I wanted the tide to play a role. And eventually that led to the title and the story. So yeah, it's weird how things like that, my parents had never taken the road trip, we would probably not be sitting here right now.
Oh, that's so crazy. We would just be talking about something else.
Mother book. Yeah. We'd be talking about your book this time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but you mentioned the butterfly net, which I really like. And so, your parents tell you something, that goes in the net. You read something, that goes in the net. Somebody says something to you, that goes in the net. You hear a song, you read a poem.
Yeah.
I always say it's about staying curious, right? And listening. And so then those things work their way in there. This is cute. Leanna Withers would like to know, do you have an interesting writing quirk?
I'm really embarrassed to share it, if I'm honest.
Oh, I can't wait. Okay, go ahead.
I really do not like to finish my day on an odd number of words. Like if I finish the day and it's like, oh, 923 words, I will generally add another word. I was this way in running. I never ran 9 miles. I would run 8 miles or 10 miles. That's a little bit of an OCD thing, and I'm super embarrassed that I actually just said it out loud. But yeah, I don't care to end things on odd numbers.
That is so funny. My daughter can't, and my son, to be honest, don't like when the volume on the car radio is on an odd number. They'll move it just one or two the other way.
Do you have any of that OCD in your writing, Patty? Like, do you have any like that? No.
I wonder if I have a weird quirk in my
I'm
writing.
sure you do. Maybe you just don't see it,
Yeah, I don't know. I think my weird quirk is it's like all I do. People say, "What are your hobbies?" I'm like, anyway, so this is a great question, and one I was going to ask you also. So Gina Ritchie would like to know, when did your love for reading begin? And I'm going to add to Gina's question and say, and did that love for reading influence what you're writing now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I don't even have an earliest memory of reading because my life was so steeped in books. We never had we never had much money growing up, but my parents were very deliberate about making sure that we had, bookshelves, and they were always stocked with books. And when I was a kid growing up, every week my mom would take us to the library and she'd let us check out a couple of books. And I can remember being 12 or 13, and I would go to the library and she'd say, okay, check out 2 books. And so the top book that I would say, okay, here's my stack, it'd be something totally innocent like Anne of Green Gables or Little Women. And then underneath it would be like Jackie Collins or Stephen King. So I think kids are really drawn to the forbidden. And books can certainly be a safer way to sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but really honestly, like there is like one writer that sticks out in my mind is like, oh yeah, this person like completely like made me want to become a writer. And that was Daphne du Maurier. You've read Rebecca, I'm sure.
Oh
right?
my gosh. Yeah. So my favorite Daphne du Maurier book is The House at the End of the Strand.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, I love that book. I can't believe we've never talked about this. I read it when I was in Cornwall.
Oh, no way. Oh, that's incredible. Oh man.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I think I've read everything that she's ever written, and she's very macabre. And so people think of like The Birds as like an Alfred Hitchcock movie, but it was her novel, The Birds.
Yeah.
And so I think the reason that Rebecca impacted me so much is because it is technically a mystery, but it is coming of age. There is a love story, and it is the most literary writing that it is possible to write. Like it's absolutely incredible. I think it is one of the most well-written books in the world. And that is one of the books that I just sort of live in like an old piece of furniture. Right around November or December, I always end up cracking that book open again when it gets stormy outside. And it's just delightful. So yeah, there's definitely authors who, if I find an author I truly love, I will just blitz my way through everything they've ever written. Yeah.
And I can see how her writing, very atmospheric, very, not dark's the wrong word, but that kind of atmospheric novel, obviously it's influenced what you actually write about also. So I think we can look back at, and I've rarely ever interviewed an author and asked about their reading life as a kid. Mm-hmm. Almost, I would say 99% of us say, my parents took me to the library.
Yeah.
I had a library card. I would check out as many books as I was allowed to check out.
Yeah.
Right. I feel as if that is such an almost prerequisite for planting this seed of being a writer. Just because you went to the library doesn't mean you're going to be a writer. But rarely do I talk to an author whose experience wasn't time spent in the library as a child.
Yeah. Although, the interesting thing is, I think, for anyone, and I'm sure there are people listening who are writers or who want to become, published authors. A lot of the time they get that advice of just read, read, read. I don't know if that's actually the right advice, because I think that's like telling a bodybuilder, oh, if you want to get stronger, just eat. But if you go around in the drive-thru at McDonald's, you're not going to get any stronger. So I think better advice is like, be really deliberate about what you put in your head, because it is going to impact your writing. So when I look for books to read, I legitimately try to find books that are just above and beyond what I could ever accomplish as a writer, because whether you like it or not, what you put in your head is going to influence your writing. There's no way around it.
100%. I mean, and not only that, but I think the podcasts you listen to, music you listen to, the audiobooks you listen to, like the rhythm of language, I
Yes.
think is really, really important. I will always argue that audiobooks are reading. It's the rhythm of language. It's the same thing. All right. So Marsha Bullock would like to know, what do you do if you have writer's block?
Right anyway. It's
Yep.
kind of the same thing as running. So, when I was training professionally, I was running anywhere between 120 to 135 miles a week. Like, it was a lot of training. And there were plenty of days that I did not feel like running. If it was, 40 and raining outside and I hit a 20 miler, the last thing I wanted to do was put on my shoes and go for a run. But there's a saying in running that the hardest step is the first one out the door. And that's really
Wow.
true. And often on those days, I would just tell myself, okay, just go and run for a mile. And usually by the end of that mile, I'd feel great and I'd end up going for the full run. So honestly, if you feel like you have writer's block, just put your butt in that seat, give it
Yeah.
a shot, tell yourself you're going to write 100 words, and you will probably surprise yourself and write 1,000.
It's true. It's true. I think too, I would say I don't necessarily get writer's block. I get story block.
Yes. Yes.
Like I don't know, because I always want to write. I'm embarrassed by how much I like to write. Like my husband will come, I'm in my little office here right now. My husband will come in and go, "Are you hiding in here?" And I'm like, maybe that's what I'm doing, but also like this is what I love to do. So when I feel stuck, I feel like, Sarah, it's more story block than writer's block. I don't know where it's going next. I'm not sure what I want to write about. I'm not sure if I'm using the right scenes and so that can make me feel stuck.
Is there
Um,
anything you do specifically to break yourself out of that headspace?
I do. I do. I love to read poetry. I have hundreds of poetry books up here. I take long walks, like miles and miles and miles. I love hiking and walking, even if I don't love
Patty,
running.
Patty, you are so close.
It's close to running, but not. I love hiking. I'll hike for, 20 miles. But I just feel like the breaking loose of something happens in the reading something beautiful. I'll pick up a book about creativity. One of my favorite is Rick Rubin. Have you read his book on
No.
creativity?
Mm-mm.
Holy moly cannoli. So like you pick that up and no matter what chapter you read, like something just breaks a little bit. So I think it's about
I feel that
breaking.
way about On Writing by Stephen King. I'm sure you've read that one, but
Oh,
it's just every chapter is a gem. It's unbelievable.
every chapter. And also Julia Cameron, her stuff on writing, The Artist's Way.
Yes.
Sometimes I'll just open to any chapter in there. Madeline L'Engle has a book called Walking on Water, and it's
Mhm.
about creativity. And I will pick that up, and she just has just the most beautiful thing. So it's about not spinning my wheels, but also not giving up on it, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, it's not necessarily writer's block. It just might be having to break it out in a new way. And I like the hardest part is that putting your shoes on and walking out the door,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just facing the page all together.
Mhm.
I'm curious. This is not a question from anybody else, but as we've been talking, when did you start running and why? Like, what is it about that athletic endeavor that was appealing to you and has continued to be appealing to you?
It's funny. It's almost like reading. It's not that I ever started running, it's that I never stopped because
Oh,
kids,
I love that. Okay.
they do. That's what they do. Truly, I think anything that as a child, if you realize you have a talent for it and you start to succeed, you're going to chase that thing. And for me, this is going to be a bit of a ramble, but bear with me. When I was in high school, I was 14 years old and I qualified for this race, and it was called Border Clash. It was where they took the top 80 girls from Washington and Oregon and raced them together at the Nike headquarters in Portland, Oregon. So I
Okay.
qualified for this race, and the night before the race, there was a big pre-race dinner, and then there was a guest speaker, and it was a woman named Shalane Flanagan, who was an Olympian. And she stood up there and she was looking out at this auditorium full of kids. There was 80 guys, 80 girls. And she told us, she's like, you guys are really talented, but the odds are statistically that just one of you will go on to become a professional runner someday. And she told us that it wasn't going to be, the most talented or hardworking person, but she said the person who has the most grit. And then she said, Grit
Oh,
is what
wow.
happens. It happens at the intersection of passion and perseverance. It's the person who loves it so much that they'll keep going through every injury, every hard race, and every setback. And I remember thinking at 14 years old, I was like, that you have this great big heart full of dreams in it. You think that could be me. Now, the next day in that race of 80 girls, I would love to tell you that I won and Nike waved a contract under my nose. I was 72nd place. I was very nearly dead
Wow.
last, but her words always stuck with me. So I kept going and I got a little better year after year after year. And then eventually, when I signed my first contract to run professionally, I realized I was sitting there and it had been 7 years since that day at 14. And I was like, it was grit that got me here. I ended up being the kid in the room that succeeded. And then honestly, it was 14 years later that I signed my contract with Simon and Schuster. And I realized the exact same thing. And I was like,
Oh, wow.
wow, that grit was the thing that brought me there. So it's honestly like I love the challenge. I love the grind. I honestly truly like I love even the failure because it's like, okay, am I going to kick back at this failure until success shines through? And I'm the person who I will kick and kick and kick until my foot's bleeding. Yeah.
That's amazing. One of the questions a woman named Jessica DeLillo asked is, what is the best advice you've ever received? And I feel like you just answered it, right?
Actually, it's funny. The sort of the best advice I've ever received, it actually found its way into MIDDLETIDE and Chido, the character of Chido, says it. So I had a really bad race in college and I had come home to my dorm room and I was
Where'd you go to college, Sarah?
Western Washington University. So up
Okay.
in Birmingham, right near the border of Canada. Just insane. Again, I feel like I wrote 90,000 words to try to do justice to that area, and I just failed utterly. But anyway, so I'd come home after this bad race, and I was complaining about it. And Maria, my roommate, who is as blunt as it is possible for a human person to be, she just stops me. She goes, "You know what, Sarah? Don't flatter yourself. Nobody cares." And it's like these shackles just fell off. And I feel that way about writing. It's like at the end of the day, you have that saying, like, keep it simple, stupid. I sort of started saying, like, jabs, JABS, like, it's just a book, stupid. Like, so with a bad review,
Yeah.
it's like, it's not who I am. It's not my self-worth. So really, it's just, honestly, the advice is just truly like, nobody cares, write like nobody cares. And it's so freeing.
Well, I mean, one of the things we talk about when we talk about writing is like the only way we're going to get that book done is because we want to get that book done.
Yeah.
Right. Number one, nobody else can write it for us.
Yeah.
It's a lonely endeavor. Number two, if we don't care about finishing it, it doesn't matter how late we are on our contract, what our readers are waiting for. And they truly, in the end, all they care about is a good story. Yeah. So they're not going to, watching our daily whining isn't going to.
They don't care if we've hit our word count or not.
No.
Yeah. So Patti,
Somebody asked if you have a daily word goal when you write. A woman named Eileen Blumetti wants to know, do you have a daily word goal when writing a manuscript?
Yes, but it changes throughout. So in the beginning of the book, when I just start, I cap myself at 500 words a day, which forces me to get to know the characters and to sink into the setting over a number of days. And then once I hit about chapter 3 or 4, I'll up that to 1,000. And then honestly, by the time I'm near the end, and at that point, the characters are living and breathing, there's times I've hit like upwards of 2,500 words at a time. What about you, Patti? You have a word count?
That's exactly the same. So I won't limit myself to 500, but those 500 usually come like going through mud in the beginning because I don't know what they would say or why they would say it. Yes. I don't even know the name of the town.
I'm so glad I'm not alone. That's
and I'm everything is XX to come and it's just like dragging. But my flow is about 2,000 to 2,500 a day. Like that's when I'm in it to win it. That's what I like to do, about 2,000 to 2,500. Isn't that funny?
Honestly, it feels like that number, that 1,000 to 2,000 is actually pretty standard across the board. Like most writers that I meet, that's about what they're shooting for. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll, usually sometimes I'll be writing and I'll need to stop, get up, walk around. I'm you can tell by what I'm antsy, and I'll look down and it'll be like 1,800 to 2,200. It's almost like that's when like the chapter stops, my fingers stop, like my brain says, break time, cup of coffee time.
It really is like when you're deep in the flow like that. I always describe it as like if if my brain is like a swimming pool, it's like running's in the shallow end. It's very grounding. It's very basic. It's a very like that desire to beat someone else to a mark on the pavement is a very like primal thing. But
Yeah.
fiction writing it's deep in, baby. Like it's so subconscious. And when you're at it in the flow, it truly is like it's a time warp. Like you can look up and 3 hours have gone by. It's insane.
It is kind of crazy. That's what I'm saying. My husband will say, "Are you hiding in here?" And I'm like, "Stop, I'm not hiding." But I have heard that
We're
people
professional hiders, Patty. That's what we
I
are.
know it's true, but I have heard that runners hit flow too. So
Absolutely. And I'm sure you do all hiking as well. It's the same thing. Yeah.
oh, I don't know. I think there is a certain endorphins, hit that you get as a runner that is, my kids are very, very athletic. And so they say that's a real thing. But, all right, before we round this up, we only have another minute or two. So this is from somebody named Richard King. What is the most important thing that you have learned about publishing and marketing in your first book? Because this is your debut. So what is the most important thing you've learned about that?
Oh man, that's really tricky. As to the marketing side, that is really not my forte. I deeply despise having to feel like I'm like selling myself or a product. That just really like goes against my grain, and I think that goes against a lot of writers. But truly, I think the most effective marketing tool is what you do, Patty, like going around and meeting with writers and building your career one block at a time. But what I've learned about the publishing business, there is peanut butter in the gears. Like it is a slow business, and
oh gosh, it is a hurry up and wait business.
Yes. And I can't remember who said it, but someone said like, I am patient, but it's the waiting that kills me. Like that's how I feel.
I love it. I love it.
Publishing, it's like it just because you write a book, and for me, it's like I write really, really quickly. So MIDDLETIDE was a 3-month write, and then it sold a few months after that, and then it came out like 2 years later. Like books kind of have to have that runway. They need a good lead time because all the big book boxes and the celebrity book clubs, they're choosing their titles like a year in advance. So you kind of have that runway, but it's taught me a lot of patience. And then, I think the hard thing about being a debut author, especially, because I have been fortunate enough to land things like Book of the Month or a Barnes and Noble monthly pick, it has in some ways like put me out over my skis a little bit.
Yeah.
And I didn't have time to build up the thick skin that I think I needed right off the bat. So that's been difficult. And I think it's been kind of a crash course in, okay,
it always is.
Yes, yeah. So that's been a more difficult aspect of it, but overall, yeah, it's been an incredible experience, and it's such a different world than running. Running, your standard of success is objective. It's minutes and seconds. It's did you beat the person next to you or not? And I moved from that into a job where success. This book is someone's least favorite book and someone's most favorite book.
Exactly, and there is no. I always say there's no winning.
Yeah,
like this is not. This is not an endeavor where you win. It is. It is the most satisfying and the most heartbreaking career in the whole world.
Yeah.
But real quick before we go, are you working on something right now that we'll be seeing and reading? We have a lot of people asking this.
Yes. So I wrote a book called The Briars that will be out next spring. So in about a year from now, that's a book that in the foothills around Mount St. Helens in Southwest Washington, which is very near where I grew up. I'm tremendously excited about the book. And then right now I'm currently working on the one after, which is it's a mystery novel based on an urban legend in the Columbia River Gorge, which has been super, super fun. What about you, Patty? I know you're about to go on tour and you've got the book coming out in 9 days, but what are you working on now?
Oh gosh, I am actually working on a novel, but it won't be out for a couple years. But it is actually about a hiker who's lost.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. Yeah,
so
I'm going to make a guess based on where you live. Appalachian Trail?
Yep. Yep. All right, everybody out there, thank you so much for joining us today for the Mystery and Thriller monthly pick for MIDDLETIDE. If you don't have this book yet, why not? What are you waiting for? Grab it right now at barnesandnoble.com or run to your local store and get it. And Sarah, I just loved talking to you, and I loved all the questions everybody out there sent in. And Harry, Aisha, thank you for having us, Barnes and Noble. This was an absolute delight.
Yes, thank you both so much.
Take care, everyone.